Okay, the rest of 6.4, okay? So yesterday we talked about finding inverse functions. And we looked at what that means if it's got a odd power or an even power, things like that. Now we're going to talk about how to figure out if the inverse function is an actual function or not. So when we test lines or test parabolas or things like that, to see if it's a function, we use a vertical line test, yes? Okay. If we graph the original equation and use a horizontal line test, we can decide if our new inverse is going to be a function or not. So if I graph the original and use a horizontal line test, that allows me to know if the inverse is a function or not. So if I want to figure out if my original is a function, I use vertical line test. If I want to figure out if my inverse is a function, I use a horizontal line test. Okay? Same rule applies. If it goes through it horizontally and it hits it twice, it's not a function. Okay? So your inverse will not be a function in that case. Which makes sense because of this. Look at that parabola. Is that parabola normally a function? If I did a vertical line test on it, it's a function. To figure out if the inverse is a function, you do the horizontal line test. So when I do a horizontal line test on it, it's not a function. Because yesterday we talked about that and looked at it, and when we graph this inverse, it graphs this way, right? Okay? And it's not a function, because if I did a line test on it that way, we know it's not a function. Okay? So it just takes that step out. It allows us to come up with the equation and tell if it's a function or not without actually having to graph it after we come up with the equation. Because when we go to graph some of these ones, right, some of these are hard because it's like the fourth root of 2x plus 6 over 12. Does anyone want to try to plug numbers into that and graph that? No, not without a graphing calculator. That's crazy. Like, we don't want to try to do that. So this allows me to know beforehand and then just do the math to get it there. Okay? So you get stuff like this, and it says, consider the function 2x cubed plus 1. Determine whether the inverse of f is a function, then find the inverse. So they went ahead and graphed 2x cubed plus 1 for you. So how do I tell if the inverse is a function?
Oh, the horizontal.
Yeah, the horizontal. So if I put a horizontal, what, Maddie?
How would you go about graphing it?
You plug in numbers, and you do the math. So I would plug in probably -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2.
And then just plug those points?
Yeah, so like you would set it up like this,
So
right?
f of x is y.
So here I would get -1, right? Because -1 cubed is -1, -2, so -2 plus 1 is -1, and I'd plot that set of points.
Okay.
So you just have to do it by hand, so choose easy numbers. Okay? So, when I do the horizontal line test on this, I see that my inverse is going to be a function.
Woo-hoo.
Okay? So yes, inverse equals function. Now we find the inverse like we found it yesterday. What do I do with x and y?
Flips.
Yep, so x equals 2y cubed plus 1
-1.
minus 1. X minus 1 equals 2y cubed. X minus 1 over 2 equals y cubed. Cube root it, right? And then the cube root of x minus 1 equals 2, which equals the inverse of the function. Now, that, doing the horizontal line test to tell if it's a function is much easier than graphing this and using a vertical line test. So that's why we're going to do it that way. Does that make sense?
I like that.
Okay? We'll save you some time and some headache. We won't require you to graph these things outrageously. Okay. With that being said, oh, and I'm going to add to this problem, so just know that's coming. Okay, with that being said, you get word problems. Average price, P in dollars, for a National Football League ticket can be modeled by P equals 35T to the 0.192. where T is the number of years since 1995. Find the inverse model that gives time as a function of the average ticket price. So what do we want it to say? P equals or T equals? Okay, now, let's talk about that. You're right, it says inverse, so what would you naturally wanna do?
Switch to P and T.
Switch the P and T. Here's the problem, when I switch P and T, what am I resolving for?
T. Wait.
P,
Oh,
you're resolving for P. So even though it says inverse, we are going to find the
So
inverse.
it's like the inverse of what you're actually.
Yeah, okay, so it's just, yes, so it's just worded funky in here. So we're just going to leave it, cause we're finding the inverse of the inverse, basically, which means I can leave it and just solve. So I wanna solve for T. So if I take this and solve for T, what's my first step?
Divided by 35.
Yeah, divide by 35. I get P over 35 equals T to the 0.192. Now, here's where I want you to talk to me again. How do I get rid of 0.192? You take the square root of 0.192. Okay, that's too messy. Here's the deal. If I have something like x to the third, that changes to what?
3.
The cube root of something, right? What can the cube root change to? Or I'm sorry, well, let's say this. What can this change to? What can the cube root of something change to?
X. No, if you do the X 1/3.
Yes, it changes to that 1/3 power, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if I have 0.192, what does that change to?
2.
Yes, 1 over 0.192. In this case, we're going to use this instead because it's much easier to do this on your calculator. In fact, on yours, I don't even think we can do this, okay? So we need to use some common sense and make things easy for ourselves, okay? On my calculator, I can do this, but I don't think on yours you can. So we're going to then change this to say P over 35 to the 1 over point 192, right? Equals T. Now, there's my equation, that's all they asked me to do, find the inverse, so that you solve for time. Okay, I'm gonna ask you to do something more. Let's use this equation to start, or let's use a equation, you'll tell me which one, to figure out how much would football tickets cost in today's 2019. Which formula would you wanna use? Would you wanna use the inverse model, or would you wanna use the original? Think about this, I'm asking you how much it cost.
Oh.
The average price is P, so P equals.
Yes, so P equals.
And
So
then
if I wanna
divide
figure out how much it costs for today's tickets, okay?
by
How many years does T represent now from 95 till now?
24.
24,
Okay. Smart.
and then it's the 0.192. So tell me what that answer comes out to be.
Circle and door it up.
$94 for 2 cents.
Alright.
It's not $94.
I mean, 64.
$64,
Yes.
and what?
43
You
cents.
might have
Okay.
this.
$64.43. Now talk to me about this. This is kind of like a life lesson, that's what I'm going with here.
That's pretty good.
We're gonna apply it to life. $64.43. Who has ever been to a football game? How much are tickets?
Matters where you sit though.
Okay, let's say cheap Bengals tickets up in the cheap section.
Probably more than that.
Yeah, Alex is right, probably more than that. In fact, for a team that sucks, such as the Bengals, they are like $100 tickets, like, you'll be lucky if you can find a ticket for $100, between $100, $125, something like that, for the cheap seats. Is that a good exponential model?
No.
No. But listen, at the time, that was a great exponential model. So think about what inflation has done over the years. Okay? If you go to a Seattle game, and I can tell you this because my cousins own, like a half of a package of season tickets, okay? And they have like midway tickets, not like great tickets, not bad tickets, midway. Their average cost for one ticket is $450 a game.
Oh, no.
Some Seattle fans are paying in the $1,000 range for a ticket. Okay? Think about this though, Seattle has minimum wage at $15 an hour.
Really?
What is Ohio's minimum wage?
$8.10.
$8.10,
There's 25.
Now I know what
Okay. So
Oh,
$8.10.
Morgan, rub it in.
Depending on where you live, depending on your economy, depends on how much inflated things are around you as well, right? So in retrospect, you gotta think about that.
Like houses in California are much more expensive.
Right, houses
but-
in California are crazy expensive.
But you get paid.
You get paid more, but it probably still doesn't balance out exactly right. To live in the Midwest area where we live, you actually have more like bang for your buck per to say, because the inflation's not as bad around here and things like that. You can make decent amounts and not have to pay as much for other things. My cousins also own a scrub store, and their store is in Washington State, because I live in Washington, but it's on the border of Washington and Idaho. And in Idaho, $8.25 is minimum wage, but in Washington, $15 is minimum wage. So what do you think the people from Idaho are doing?
They wanna work in Seattle.
Yeah,
Right, in
well, going
Washington.
to work out over in Washington when they live on that border, right? So it's harder to find jobs for the people in Washington, because those people can come over and take those too, because it's a 15-minute drive. Why, why not? So, think about that type of stuff. Sometimes we come up with these exponential models, but they need to be reworked because of how, the economy goes and what happens.
Really